A major podcast company just paid nearly $1 million to settle a defamation lawsuit. And if you're a podcaster, a YouTuber, a live streamer, a blogger, or creator of any kind, there are some important lessons you should take away from this story. Because the issue wasn't merely that someone got sued. The issue is why and what to do about it, and what every content creator can do to reduce the risk of finding themselves in the same position. I'm Gordon Firemark, an entertainment, media, and business attorney, and in some circles I'm known as the podcast lawyer. I help creators of all kinds protect what they build. So let's talk about the Canadaland case. Earlier today, Pod News reported that Canadian podcast publisher Canadaland and its founder Jesse Brown have agreed to pay approximately 885,000 Canadian dollars to settle a defamation lawsuit. That lawsuit was brought by Teresa Kielburger, whose sons founded the charity WE Charity. The dispute arose from Canadaland's investigative podcast called The White Saviors. A key allegation made in that series was that Teresa Kielburger had deposited charitable donations into a family bank account. And after years of litigation, that allegation was formally retracted. The settlement in this case included a public apology, a retraction, and a requirement that the correction be added to the original podcast episode. Now, before we go any further, this is not about criticizing anybody involved, Canadaland or Jesse or Ms. Kielburger. It's about understanding what happened and what lessons creators can learn from it. So, first off, podcasts are media. The reason this case matters is that it demonstrates something that we've been seeing for years. Podcasts are no longer being treated as a casual hobby. They are media operations, media productions. And when podcasts break news, investigate claims, expose alleged wrongdoing, or discuss controversial topics, courts have increasingly been viewing them the same way they would a newspaper, a magazine, a television network, or some other online news organization. Now, that's important because the same rights come with the same responsibilities. Freedom of expression is absolutely important. Journalistic inquiry is important. Public interest reporting, very important, but accuracy is as important, if not more. The biggest lesson from this case isn't about defamation law, though. It's about verification. According to court filings and public reports, one of the issues raised in the litigation was whether sufficient efforts had been made to verify the allegations before publication. That's where many creators get into trouble. In this case, what had happened was there had been an earlier publication, a newspaper or news organization of some sort, that had published the same allegations, and they had been sued and settled for several $100,000 Canadian as well. And what happened here was the makers of this podcast didn't really fact check things far enough. And that's where a lot of creators get into trouble. It's not because they're intentionally publishing false information or because they're trying to hurt someone. No, it's because they become convinced a story is true before they've done enough work to confirm it. Good investigative reporting requires a healthy dose of skepticism, even when a source seems trustworthy, even when documents appear convincing, even when a story fits the narrative. In fact, especially then. One of the most dangerous moments in any investigation is when you find information that supports your theory. That's often when confirmation bias comes to creep into the situation. Professional journalists are trained to challenge their own assumptions, and I say all creators really should be doing the same. So here's one of the simplest habits you can develop. If you're making a serious allegation about someone, you should contact them, reach out and give them an opportunity to respond. Sometimes they'll refuse. Sometimes they won't answer. Sometimes they'll deny everything, and that's fine. The point isn't that they'll agree with you. The point is that you've made the effort. And you can talk about that effort. You may also learn something valuable and important. You might discover information you didn't previously have, or context that somehow changes the story. Or you could confirm that your reporting is solid. And either way, what you're doing is making your own content stronger and potentially more defensible. If the creators of this podcast had reached out to Ms. Kielburger, she would have told them, hey, that was dealt with years and years ago, and I sued and won because it wasn't true. That at least should have raised the red flag and said, hey, we need to do a deeper dig. So Another mistake that I see all the time in podcasting is the belief that saying, in my opinion, somehow creates a legal immunity. It doesn't necessarily. If I say, in my opinion, that person committed fraud or child molestation or whatever, the law doesn't necessarily focus on the phrase "in my opinion." The question is whether I'm communicating a factual assertion that could harm someone's reputation. Now, opinion is usually protected when it's obvious that it's a statement of opinion, but false factual assertions couched as opinion generally are not. That distinction really matters. And it's one reason that creators should be careful when discussing allegations, rumors, accusations, and various kinds of disputes. Now, one important note to make. This case arose in Canada. Canadian defamation law does differ significantly from U.S. law, and I'm a U.S. lawyer licensed only in the state of California in the United States. American courts apply constitutional protections that often make it a bit more difficult for a public figure to prevail in defamation cases. So don't assume a U.S. court would necessarily reach the same result as might have come up in this case. But that's not really the point. The lesson isn't about the differences between Canadian and American law. The lesson is that regardless of where you live and report, responsible journalism matters. Verification and documentation matter. Fairness matters. Presenting a balanced point of view matters. So, if your content discusses real people or businesses or controversies, current events, lawsuits, public disputes, allegations of misconduct, you really should take some time to review your process. Ask yourself, how do I verify information? How many sources do I rely on? Do I seek comment from people who are the subject of criticism or negative reporting? And do I preserve my notes and research? Do I have appropriate releases signed and agreements in place from people who I've interviewed? Do I have insurance coverage for media-related claims? These are questions that may not be very exciting, but they are very, very important. The kinds of questions that can save you an enormous amount of money and stress and distraction later on. Now, as I told Pod News about this story, cases like this illustrate the importance of independent fact-checking and verification. The best practice is to ensure that every potentially damaging allegation can be corroborated from 2 or 3 or more credible sources. Relying on a single source exposes you to just this scenario and potentially significant damages awards. Podcasting has become a mature industry, and it's important that we keep that in mind. Creators have more opportunities than ever before, but with greater influence comes greater responsibility. Now, if you'd like help getting your podcast business on solid legal footing, I've got several free resources. My podcast guest release among them, plus the legal guides, templates, and my free workshop, Grow Your Podcast with Confidence. You'll find links to all of those in the description below. And if you'd like to have a lawyer take a look at your show, or listen to your show, or review of your show before you publish to make sure you're not going to be finding yourself in the crosshairs of a big expensive lawsuit, reach out to me privately and visit firemark.com and you can book an appointment. Now, until next time, protect your content, protect your brand, and protect your business. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, signing off until next time. See you soon.